I've been given the order for dual reverse to large volume. I'm going to start this evolution off by completing my golden circle. As I'm walking around my rig, I'm looking at the top, making sure my equipment's secure. I'm looking at the side and looking for any loose equipment or personnel that might be around or under my vehicle. I'm proceeding to the back of my apparatus, looking for any loose equipment, looking for anything under my vehicle, and looking at the top. As I come around on the last side of my rig, I'm going to pick up my chocks and place them on my running board. Now that I've completed my golden circle, I'm ready to start up my vehicle. As I'm climbing in my vehicle, I want to make sure that my battery's on. I'm going to make sure all my passengers are appropriately seatbelted. Now I'm going to make sure my seatbelt's on. Now I'm going to start up my vehicle with my foot hovering the brake, turn the ignition on, waiting for my gauges, warning lights, and warning buzzers to finish. I'm going to turn my headlights on, and I'm going to look and check my oil pressure. Once I reach my objective, I'm going to set my maxis and prepare for my firemen to hop off. While my fireman's hopping off and pulling the appropriate hose, I'm looking in both mirrors, waiting for the signal to lay line. I have visual contact with my fireman. He's told me to lay line. Release the maxis. And I'm proceeding to my objective. As I'm driving, I want to size up my hydrant and spot my rig at an advantageous location. As I approach my hydrant, I want to bring my apparatus close enough where I can make my side connections. I'm also turning my wheels towards the hydrant in case I need to make an adjustment. Now that I've got my spot for the hydrant, my maxis are set, my emergency flashes are on, I'm turning on my outside speaker, and I'm engaging the pump actuator to put my rig into pump. I see a green light, putting my rig in drive, and now I'm ready to pump. As I step out of my rig, disconnecting my seatbelt, I'm making sure I have my appropriate PPE, helmet, brush jacket, and gloves. The first thing I want to do is place my chocks. I'm placing my chocks flush with the wheels. Next, I want to pull my tank to pump. Now I'm going to crack my tank fill, and I'm going to pull the primer. What I want to make sure is that I see a little bit of water underneath my rig. Now I want to engage my pressure governor and set it to PSI mode. I also want to make sure that I'm building pressure. I see that I'm building pressure. At this point, I'm ready to hook up my intake. Now I'm ready to make my intake to the side suction. I'm going to release the cap. I'm grabbing my appropriate hose and my appliances. Clear. Checking for threads and gasket. I'm making my connections hand tight. And grabbing my appropriate appliances. As I release the cap, I'm checking for threads and no obstructions. I need to flush my hydrant to make sure I have clear water. Now I'm ready to make my connection. Checking for threads and gasket. Now that my connection is made, my connections are tight, I'm ready to charge my side suction. I'm opening the hydrant slowly. And completely. I want to take care of my last kinks and use my rubber mallet for my chafing block. Now I'm ready to introduce water into the system. Once again, with all intakes, we want to open it slowly and completely. Bleed is closed. Now that I have my supply line, I'm walking back to my pump panel and I want to mark my compound gauge. Using my grease pencil, I'm going to use this as an indicator for how much volumes of water I have. At this point, my rig is supplied with water. My rig is building appropriate pressure. I'm ready for water. My firefighter calls for water. Water coming! As I'm walking back to my tailboard, I notice 3 lines on the ground. I'm going to break my appropriate connections. As I'm walking to the other side of the engine with my hose, I'm making my connections, starting from away from my pump panel, working my way back towards it. Once again, I'm making my connections away from my pump panel, working my way back towards it. Now that I've made my connections, I'm looking at the number of my lines, I'm looking at the size of my lines, and I'm taking a look at my overall objective to calculate my total friction loss. Now that my connections are made and I'm hooked up to a supply line, I'm closing tank to pump, I'm closing tank to fill, and I'm slowly and fully opening up my discharge gauges. Monitoring the gauges as I open. Once again, I'm slowly and completely opening my discharges. Now I'm going to throttle up to the appropriate pressure. taking note of my compound gauge as well. I'm gonna take a look at my lines, making sure there's no major leaks, no major kinks, and I'm visualizing that I have water flowing. Now that I have water flowing, I'm ready to hook up my second supply line using my front suction. I'm grabbing my appropriate appliances. Clear. And I'm bringing it over to my hydrant. Because this hydrant has one 4-inch discharge and one 2.5-inch discharge, I'm gonna need my appropriate appliances to make this connection work. Checking for threads and gasket. Once again, checking for threads and gasket. Now I'm gonna flush my hydrant. Stand clear. And make my connections. Now that my connections are tight, my hose is flaked, I'm gonna charge my front suction with water, opening this hydrant slowly and completely. Using my rubber mallet, I'm gonna place it under my hose for a chafing block. Now I'm walking back over to my pump panel to open my intake. Now that my connection is made and I have water flowing into my front suction, I'm gonna close my bleeder valve. I'm gonna open my intake. And I'm gonna take note at the compound gauge again. Now I have 2 supply lines into my engine. I have adequate water flowing to my objective. At this point, I'm gonna notify my proctor that I'm complete with the evolution. Next, I'm gonna mark my gauges. I'm gonna mark my oil pressure, my water temperature, and other miscellaneous gauges as appropriate.